You are listening to New Vision, Old Ways, the podcast that explores timeless wisdom for the modern mind in a fun, relaxed, and most important, interactive way with you, the listener. I am your host, Tony Marinaccio, and let's get the episode started. Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of Season 2, and this is my favorite episode I have produced so far. It's a rather expanded episode, but well worth the time. I had the honor and privilege to interview UK-based author Joe Barnes, and he is mentioned several times in my episodes, especially an entire episode dedicated to his book, Escape the System. That was episode 7. And if you have not listened to that episode, or if you've kind of forgotten about it, maybe go back and check it out. I dig pretty deep into the concepts that the book lays out. So if possible, go back and listen to that episode. And then this interview will certainly help expand on all of those ideas. But he also has a fantastic new book called The Rebel Code. We discussed what a true rebel is and touch on so many other life-changing things as well. I feel these two books go hand in hand with each other. That's why I am so grateful that we discussed both of these in one episode. I want to mention also that he has a great website that I highly recommend that you visit. It is in the show notes, but here it is anyway. It is www.escapethesystemnow.com. I'll repeat that, www.escapethesystemnow.com. Visit the site. He has a lot to offer anyone looking to transform their lives. Also, at the end of the interview, he gives my listeners an amazing $1 Kindle deal on his books. Link's going to be in the show notes as well. So without further ado, enjoy this fascinating discussion with author Joe Barnes. Joe, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me, Tony.
So one of the things for the listeners, obviously there was a whole show I dedicated to your book and the concepts around your book. And I got a great response from that. And a lot of people, it's one of the more well-listened shows that I have. And I think that speaks to the stuff that you're writing is very important. And I think it does speak to a lot of people. And one of the things I find fascinating is your journey from where you were, from where you started to where you are right now, and a political science major, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's right. I was at Manchester University in the UK studying politics, but I have yet to use that degree.
Well, I think it's fascinating to hear, if you wouldn't mind maybe going through a little bit of that journey from political science major to writing books about escaping the system and the rebel code. Seems kind of an ironic twist of fate as you go along there. So maybe touch on that a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so I guess it all really began in my very first term studying political science. I think I was probably 2 months into the course, and I just had this moment where I just stopped and my motivation completely ran out. I'd been motivated throughout my entire time at school. I can't say I enjoyed all of it, but I was motivated. I was always motivated to get good grades. I was told that was important. I liked doing well. I was told it was important to get good grades because I had to get into university. But now I was at university. I'd achieved this big goal that had been put in front of me 2 months into studying the course. And I just suddenly thought, what am I doing all of this for? I'm not particularly enjoying it, wasn't enjoying the experience, wasn't enjoying the course. Why am I doing this? And I couldn't actually find any meaning in the study that I was doing. So I left university, but couldn't find any meaning in any of the small jobs I was doing. So thought, well, what am I going to do? I don't want to work these crappy menial jobs that I was doing. So I thought, well, I better go back to university and finish my degree. And I did that simply because I had no better options. And I thought, well, 3 years spent trying to figure things out, I may come up with some better answers than I have right now at the moment. I didn't come up with any better answers, but I managed to finish the degree. I came back home after that with my political science degree and thought, what am I going to do? I don't want to continue along this same path of doing something that is meaningless to me. It wasn't that hard work bothered me too much. It was meaningless hard work, which just totally drained me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, whatever it is I do, I've got to do something with a bit more meaning than just making money to support myself. So I took a complete 180 and trained to be a tennis coach. After that, I trained to be a hypnotherapist. But in the back of my mind, I always had this plan that I was going to write self-help books because this was something I got fascinated by while at university. I was doing my reading, obviously, for my political science degree, but my real reading was books like The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, The Celestine Prophecy
Mhm.
by James Redfield, The Tenth Insight, that was his follow-up book. Um, Also, James Allen's As a Man Thinketh. These were the
Mm.
books which were really educating me. And as a result of that, I thought I want to add my contribution to the self-help world. Now, it wasn't many, many years, it was a decade after I left university that I finally released Escape the System. But in a nutshell, that's my journey from being a political science undergraduate to becoming a self-help author.
And I think hearing your story is very important because you touched on things already that we can obviously identify with. I think so many people who, and I'm a banker by trade, so I see a lot of people who have struggled in their life mightily. We have student loan issues. I don't know what it's like in the UK as far as how they approach university and how they pay for that. I'm not well versed in that, but I will say I do see a lot of kids that spend $100,000, $200,000 on degrees that they absolutely positively have no chance of making a career in unless they are absolutely positively over the hill dedicated to it. Maybe you can expand on that just a little bit, how just frustrating that can be for a young person to see no future in something that they've dedicated so much money and time to, and yet they walk away with just about absolutely nothing. And we see that a lot nowadays, probably more than ever, because a lot of times trade schools were never pushed. We see a lot of people just getting that in the system. They get pushed into that, university or college, in whatever way you want to put it, aspect, and they walk away with just about nothing that's going to do anything for their lives. And maybe kind of expand on that just a little bit, how a young person can maybe catch that before it really gets out of hand for them.
Well, it's a trap, isn't it? You get trapped by the debt,
Hmm.
preventing you from ever perhaps exploring some of the more adventurous avenues you want to take. You have to immediately think about starting to pay that debt off. And I think it's similar-ish in the UK as it is to the US, but just less extreme. I think the amount the American students end up owing is a lot more than the UK
Hmm.
students, but it's still the same principle. It's a trap. And unless you really know why you're going to university, or unless it's actually leading somewhere that you want it to and lead to an inspiring job or an inspiring goal that you want to follow, I just can't understand why you put yourself in that trap. Okay, you could say that yes, there's a lot of pressure. Teenagers are under a lot of pressure to go into university. There's a lot of expectation,
Hmm.
societal expectation, parental expectation, and that forces a lot of people to do it. But even at a young age, 17 or 18 or 19, as a young adult, you've got to start thinking for yourself and you've got to start telling people no if it's not if it's not in if it's not congruent with what you want to actually do with your life. And you've got to figure out early as well, because I never figured out what I wanted to do early, and that was
Hmm.
something that really held me back. Now, fortunately, I didn't get trapped in student debt, because it was slightly different back then than it is now. So fortunately, that didn't happen to me. But if I was in that situation now, or what would I tell a young teenager now, or a 15, 16-year-old? Start to figure out what you want to do with your life quickly, because if you don't, there's a potential that you can get trapped. Um, it's trapped in the system doing something which is pretty boring, very stressful, very demanding.
And I think a lot of people feel that now, like I said, probably more than ever. And escaping the system is a great concept. And if you wouldn't mind maybe going over what your interpretation of the system is, I think that might help a little bit clear the air, because you can interpret that in many different ways. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there. They could be thinking you're talking about that. That's not where we're going with this. I mean, this is a different concept. And if you can lay that out for us, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it is a different concept. It's the idea is you escape the system on two levels. First of all, you have to do it mentally. You have to unplug. I call it unplug from the matrix in the books.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Andrew
Great
Tate's
example.
always saying that now. Unplug for the Matrix. Well, I was saying it 8 years before he came along, even though I'm a little less well known than he is. But you have to unplug from the Matrix in the sense that, or sorry, unplug from the system. And I use the Matrix as an analogy in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Unplug from the system basically means don't think like everybody else does, because if you end up thinking like everybody else does, your results are going to be pretty similar. You can't take for granted um, the commonly held ideas about how you should live your life, what's acceptable, what's not, what is possible for you, and what's not. You can't engage in any thinking like that. You have to broaden your horizons on what's possible. I took in the book about the way in which you see reality. Now, we are told that reality is one way. And for most of us, unless you're born with an exceptional talent or exceptionally lucky, and you get to be a sporting superstar or a musician or something like that, most of us just have to accept the fact that we're going to have to do a pretty boring job to pay for ourselves, to pay for a family. And over the years, our vitality is going to dwindle. We're going to become older, we're going to become weaker, etc. And we're not going to live particularly exciting lives. Now, this is something one of my university tutors said to the class in the final year while we were at university. And I still remember that day. He said, "Oh, let's just face it, nobody here is really going to live an exciting life." And
Mm.
I thought, what a thing to tell a bunch of 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds. You're 21, you're 22, in theory, you're in the prime of your life. You've got your whole life ahead of you. It should be some big adventure. And yet here was this guy saying, "Look, guys, nobody here is going to live an exciting life." And you basically, that is laying the foundations for getting trapped in the system because you carry that belief around with you. You think, "Oh, there's nothing I can do. This is just reality. This is just the way the world works." So when I tell you escape the system, big part of it is unplug from that way of thinking. You don't have to think like that. Life can be a big adventure for you, even if you don't have some incredible talent that you discovered in your childhood. Life can still be a big adventure and you can still do incredible things, but you have to disconnect from that way of thinking. So that's part one. Disconnect from that way of thinking. Part two is you start building your dream, which is eventually going to see you physically escape from the system. And when I say physically escape from the system, do I mean that you will stop paying taxes to your government? Probably not. Um, do I mean that you're going to isolate yourself and live in the wilderness? Maybe if that inspires you, but again, probably not. What I mean is that you're not going to have to do anything you don't want to do in life. You're going to put yourself in a position where you don't have to do that. You only do the things that inspire you. That's the second part of escaping the system. Now, that may mean building enough wealth. And I love the term in the movie The Gambler, which has got Mark Wahlberg in it. The
Mhm.
character John Goodman talks about having fuck you money. So it may be that building enough wealth. So if somebody tells you that you've got to go and do something, you can say fuck you to them,
Yep.
basically. It might be that, or maybe you're the thing that inspires you. You're perfectly inspired doing something which doesn't earn you a fortune, but because that's your inspiration, money isn't that. You make enough to survive, to feed your family, and that's enough for you. So that second aspect of the system is creating a life for yourself where you do the things which, you only do the things which inspire you.
Well, it comes down to the power of thought. And you mentioned that, on several occasions where the power of thought is just so important in these cases. And I think a lot of people with social media, especially younger people, obviously, with social media, with the way the general media, or I like to call it sometimes the agenda media, just pushes things on people. And you're not almost allowed to think for yourself in many cases. How does one, especially if you're younger, how do you break free from that concept of just not being able to think for yourself? You're always following some sort of trend. You're conforming to what your peers are obviously into. I don't know if uh, Obviously, I don't know exactly what happens at the universities in the UK, but here, if you saw in the news, we had a lot of turmoil around the Israeli Gaza issue, and there were a lot of people that didn't really understand what they were even protesting about. It's okay to protest. It's okay to want change in certain areas, but they don't even know what they're even protesting about. And I think the power of thought is lost there because they're just going along with whatever they feel is necessary to do. Maybe speak to that, just that the power of thought and how it can just be so vital to your everyday life.
Well, I mentioned the books that inspired me at university, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind and As a Man Thinketh, and they essentially are
Great book. Yeah.
exploring the power of your thought. And up until the age of 22, I didn't realize that my thinking is what shapes my life, the direction of my life. I just thought my thoughts were some weird things I had going on in my head, which were just a reaction to the events of my life. I didn't realize that the relationship is actually reversed, and your thoughts create and determine your life. So even when I learned that concept, I rejected it at first because I thought this is just so weird. I don't know how this could possibly work. And it's only through years and years and decades of trial and error have I actually seen that, yes, I can change the direction of my life through the power of my thoughts. Obviously, you have to take actions as well, but the engine, the thing that starts the movement in a certain direction, is the thought itself. So, what was your question, Tony? How the role that thought plays, or what was
Well,
it
the
in
power of
particular?
thought, again, like I think is lost sometimes with, like I said, the idea that people just are so consumed with social media, so consumed with what other people think, and the conformity is it overtakes everything that they do in their lives. And I think thinking for yourself, this is what I love about your books. I love the idea that you consistently go back to the even in the Rebel Code, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. You come back to the idea that you can think for yourself. It's okay. It may seem scary at first because you may not be going along with the crowd. You may even get a little alienated. But people are so scared of that, it stops them from really truly being who they want to be inside. They just go along with the crowd. The power of thought, I think, is just so vital. Just to control your own mind and to control your own actions.
Yeah. So, okay, my by answering that question, I'm going to jump from my first book, Escape the System, to it's not my second book, but it's the other book that we're discussing today,
Yep.
which is my most recent book, which is The Rebel Code. I would say I in that book I say that there are three types of people.
Mhm.
You're either a leader, a follower, and a rebel. Now, a follower by definition doesn't really think for themselves. They just go along with the crowd, and they do this because their main drive is security. They
Mhm.
want to fit in, they want to be safe. So even if they have doubts about what the majority are doing, they're still going to do what the majority are doing because deep down they're driven by that need for security. The leader, yes, can think for themselves to a degree, but they want to be in a position of power within the power structure, within the system. So there again, they're going to go along with what the status quo is. That really only presents the rebel with the option to think for themselves, but it's not so much just thinking for yourself. I think this is something natural and innate within you. So you and me, Tony, we do think for ourselves. We ask questions. I think some people don't, and that's okay. I'm not saying everybody has to be a nonconformist. Everybody has to do their own thinking. That's not what I'm saying. But if you are that type of person, you are a rebel personality type where you do question what you're told, you
Mhm.
don't just accept everything that comes to you, then it's not necessarily about doing your own type of thinking because you'll already be doing that. It's actually acting on it, having the strength to follow where your different thoughts lead you. That is the great divide. And anybody who's listening to this and does think differently, does question the status quo and what they're told, I would say don't just do that, act on those thoughts as well.
You have some great examples now that we're in the Rebel Code, which is a fantastic book, by the way. And again, I think it's one of those books where you can read it, and the way you approach the subject is fantastic because there is a fine line between being a rebel who is just going to want to be difficult and you just want to be difficult by nature because you think you're being a rebel, or there's being a rebel. Like you use a great example, one of my favorite examples of Nelson Mandela. There's other favorites that you use Quincy Jones, which is a fantastic example. I'm a big music guy, so that really spoke to me. But if you want to touch on the Nelson Mandela story, I think that is a perfect example of a human being that could have easily went a completely different direction and didn't. And he did what his heart told him to do. And that to me is a true rebel, not, putting a leather jacket on and slicking your hair back and smoking a cigarette, or back in the day with the UK when they did the mods and the rockers. They're rebels, I guess, if you want to call them that, but if you truly have a purpose, if you truly have something in your heart that you want to, maybe make the world better, or make your life better, or make the people around you better, those are to me the true rebels that change things, and they do it with specific purpose. And speak to that fine line between, you could be a rebel with a cause, or you could be a rebel with just no direction and you just want to be difficult.
Yeah, I guess that's the this distinction you're making. Also, I think some of those rebels who are just, embracing the outward signs of rebellion. You talked about, the old example of maybe slick back hair, leather jackets, that kind of thing, and or ta in the past, it used to be, funnily enough, tattoos used to represent what a rebel is. Now everybody has one. You're a follower, really, if you have a tattoo. Um, but the point is that some people rebel for the sake of rebellion to try to be different. Really, they're just followers because
Mhm.
they putting on the jacket of being a rebel, but underneath it, they're just a follower because they're desperate for that security. They're desperate to be accepted. A true rebel is somebody who follows their heart and does so regardless of their popularity and whether people think it's cool to do it or not. They are going to stay true to their heart. And the arc of a true rebel is interesting because at first they will tend to be rejected, ridiculed, and it's only with time that they're going to climb, and that eventually the view of them will change, and they will go from the person who is rejected and ridiculed to the person who is celebrated and held up as a hero, as Nelson Mandela was.
And if you want to touch on that Nelson Mandela story, I think our listeners I'm sure most people are familiar with who Nelson Mandela is, but they may not be aware of his story. And I think his story is very important because it may be a little more extreme than what a common person might
Mm.
endure. But I think it also makes a very good point to say, hey, this is what a real rebel is in his heart. This is somebody that changed the world. And I think and they say one person cannot change the world. Well, he did. And
Mm.
he's still doing it now, even after his death. So if you maybe want to go over that story a little bit, I know you've said it before in certain interviews, but I think it's a fascinating.
Okay. So yeah, I will make the point that I'll just give you the context for the story, Tony. So basically, in the Rebel Code, there are 12 steps to finding your place in the world and winning. And the Nelson Mandela example, I believe it comes from step two, which is about following your heart. Um, Now, the reason I use this story is because I wanted to give an example. Okay, step two is be guided by your heart when making major life decisions. Now, I make the point that rebels are guided by their heart, followers and leaders are guided by their head. They do what makes sense. A rebel does what feels right. And what feels right doesn't always make sense in the short time, but there is, I believe, a master plan behind it all. Call it the universe, call it God, whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a thread behind following your heart and making heart-based decisions, which will eventually lead you to the right place. Now, my point with the Nelson Mandela story was that a lot of people don't realize that he grew up in a position of relative privilege. I say relative privilege because he was living in a country where there was an apartheid system and blacks were seen as the third class, the lowest class. They had blacks, coloreds, and whites, and blacks were at the bottom. Even though they were the ones native to the country from centuries
Mhm.
ago, they were at the bottom of that system. So you can never really be in a privileged position. But within his tribe, he was in a privileged position. He had his education paid for by the king of his tribe, and the whole point was that he was going to go back to his tribe and be a royal advisor. and have a relatively privileged life as a royal advisor. But he said, no, that's not actually what I want to do. I'm inspired to become a lawyer. I want to become a lawyer because I want to defend the impoverished, the ones who are the victims of injustice in Soweto, which was a township around the outside of the capital of South Africa, Johannesburg. So he actually built up a successful law practice, and he went against what he was supposed to do. He rebelled against the tribal chiefs and followed his heart. But then, he had a successful law practice. And again, he made a decision to rebel against that because he could no longer turn his, head away and his heart away from what was happening to his people, the apartheid system, and how it was oppressing the people of South Africa. So he joined the ANC, African National Congress, which was taking a stand and trying to fight and resist apartheid. And again, he didn't have to do that. He could have stayed in the relative comfort of being a lawyer, but he said, no, my heart is calling me to do this. I have to take a stand against apartheid. And in the short term, he made his life worse because of doing that. He had to go into hiding. He couldn't see his family. He ended up getting arrested, almost was killed, instead got life imprisonment, spent 28 years in prison because of this. And again, he was faced with a decision at the end of his prison term. If you renounce the violence and the riots that were occurring in South Africa during the 1980s, you will be freed. We know how much power you have if you just say these are bad things. This was the South African government that was offering him this option. And again, he said, no, I'm not going to do it because this is something I believe in. I know why those people are rioting. I'm not going to sell my people out. I'm desperate for freedom, but not on those terms. So I think he spent another 5 years in prison after that. But eventually he got out. He became the president of South Africa, overturned an entire political system. Obviously, he had help, but he was the key figure in overturning an entire political system. Now, how many people do that? That's just incredible. And I would argue that partly that occurred because he had the strength to follow his heart. He didn't do what made sense. It would have made sense to begin with to go back and be an advisor to the royal family of his tribe. It would have made sense to stay as a lawyer and stay one of the most well-off in his, well-off within the blacks of that society. But he didn't do what made sense. He did what his conscience told him to do. And eventually he won because of that. So that maybe not in a nutshell, maybe that was quite a detailed description.
Oh, no, it's a great description.
Is the story that I use in the book.
You use other examples too as well, but I think that's the key right there is that the rebel code focuses on, again, it's not about just being difficult. So the rebel is not just somebody that's just going to go out there and cause trouble. The rebel is somebody that has something different in their heart that they want to act on. And I believe that's very important for a distinction for younger people.
Yeah, that you just made me realize something, Tony. The rebel is often the most moral and the deep down, not on an exterior, not virtue signaling, but underneath it all, they're the most moral and upright people. It's only because we live in a very sick society that they are considered
Mm.
rebels because they go against the sickness. They go against what now you mentioned it with social media is this horrific focus on materialism and appearance. They go against conformity. They stand up, and that makes them a bit of a target. And the people, the majority, then points a finger at them and says, "Hey, you're a bad person. You shouldn't be saying that. You shouldn't be doing this because it's challenging what we say is right." But they only challenge what they say is right because deep down, those rebels know that it's not right and that they need to take a stand against it. So you can be a reluctant rebel. I'm a reluctant rebel. I'm not. I wasn't a rebel at school. I wasn't smoking. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. Never smoked. Never even taken a puff on a cigarette in my
Mhm.
life. Never even consumed any kind of narcotic. So in that respect, I'm pretty boring. But I'm a reluctant rebel in the fact that a lot of what society puts on me doesn't mesh with me, doesn't resonate, and I'm not going to just be quiet and accept it. I'm going to speak out in my own way against it. So that there is that kind of rebel, which I hope I've kind of clarified for you now.
One of the things that I think is so important these days is parenting, and I believe that parents have a difficult job. I mean, I don't know how the schools are in the UK as far as a lot of these things go, but we have a lot of times where the school boards, the teachers are now invading the way a child develops, so much so they're not really almost there sometimes. And I'm not saying every teacher, every school board, but in a lot of cases, you find kids that are getting swayed by the agendas that these teachers have, some of the school boards have, and then parents are in a battle right now. They're in a battle with trying to keep these kids, how do we get these kids to come back and realize what is right, what is wrong, and lead them in the right direction. I think it's great that if a parent is okay with showing a kid that he could think for himself and be that kind of rebel that you're talking about, is fantastic. How can a parent really these days, especially, how can a parent battle through some of this stuff? I don't know if that's something that you have a lot of thoughts about, but if it's something that you can kind of expand on, I think that would be great, because that's where I think I see a lot of problems, is where these kids just are not guided from birth on. And when they get to that point, they're a teenager, they're so lost now, and they're so overwhelmed with social media and conformity that they have
Mm.
no idea where to go from there. But if they started earlier, maybe they wouldn't have gone down that horrible path for a while.
Yes, I could only say I would challenge some of what the schools were telling the children to my child, and I would always try to teach my child to ask questions. I was told off for asking questions when I was a child. It wasn't well, maybe a little bit the school that was telling me off, but also my parents, wouldn't my dad especially, do this, do that. And I'd say, why? And he'd say, well, because I told you. And then there's obviously a big respect thing. A child needs to respect their father and their parents, and sometimes do things which don't make sense because of that respect. And that's something I learned as I got older. But that spirit to question authority, or to question and think for yourself, is something I think that should be really encouraged. And I guess the parents just got to tell the child at all times, look, your school might be telling you this, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. You might need to get good grades at school, fine, but it doesn't mean you have to believe everything that they tell you there. That is how I try and teach my children to think for themselves. Um, I kind of perhaps get what you're getting at with that. I do tennis coaching, so I do come into contact with quite a lot of young kids, and I had this 11-year-old girl in my class, tennis class, telling me she was a bisexual. And I just said to her, no, you're not. You don't even know. I know that, that at that age there's a lot of influence from, hey, it's great to be gay, it's great to be trans. And I'm not
Absolutely.
saying there's anything wrong with that if you truly are, but don't say you are just because you think it's cool, or because now it's become cool to be gay or lesbian or trans. Just be true to yourself, whatever that is. If it's not boring to be straight, and or it's not boring at 11-year-old not to even know what you are yet, and not even be interested in either sex. So yes, I do get what you're saying. I think the kids are having a lot of warped messages,
Mhm.
warped messages they just don't need to hear. It's not a case of saying that, it's say promoting um being homosexuality or transgender. It's not saying that's a bad thing in a way. We don't even need to talk to 10, 9, 8-year-old kids about that stuff. That can be a topic for when they're older, but anyway, I think I'm digressing a little bit. The
No,
point
not
is,
at all. I think it's beautifully said, and I think that's exactly what I think a lot of parents are battling right now. And it's very difficult for young kids to feel comfortable being themselves, truly themselves, and
yeah,
worrying about what everybody else is thinking. And I think someone like you doing the kind of work that you're doing, because you're not just the author, you obviously have a website. I believe you do coaching. You do a lot of different things that are helping people. And I think the Escape the System book and the Rebel Code, I really believe these two books, if you're going to get these two books, folks, get them, because they go hand in hand. It's almost like a part one and a part two. At least that's the way I viewed both of them.
yeah.
And there's a great quote that you have going maybe back just to the Escape the System book just for a second, but on page 50, and I say that because just in case you wanted to look, there is a fantastic quote that you have in there. It states, "The ultimate boon of breaking free from the system is the opportunity it creates. Detach yourself from its way of thinking, and your consciousness becomes elevated above the ordinary." And I think that is a perfect way to frame out why you would want to do this, because what's more important than your life? I mean, you state right there, if you're scared to do this, if you're scared to escape the system, if you're scared to be the true rebel that maybe you are, that's a statement right there that should put it into perspective as to why you'd want to do this, because you could do something that's really, above and beyond and out of the ordinary. And I think that is so self-fulfilling that I think it would make so many more people happy than having a $200,000 school loan and working at a grocery store. Nothing wrong with that, but that's where we end up these days. So maybe if you wouldn't mind talking about someone who's scared to get this life started and doesn't really see what you state in that passage right here, doesn't see maybe what the end result could be, that you could do something out of the ordinary.
Mm. Okay, so are you asking how they would go about doing that, Tony? Was it
Well, just
what?
if you're scared right now, which a lot of people are, they're scared to basically make those changes, but because they don't
Yeah.
really see what that end result could be. And that statement kind of lays it out there that you could be doing something that's a little bit above and beyond the ordinary and elevate yourself to that point. It's just how do you get from being scared
Yeah.
to elevating yourself to do something a little out of the ordinary?
It's a long, long road and journey. I wish I could sugarcoat it and say that there's some secret hack
Hmm.
to doing it, but I'm afraid there's not really. Maybe it would offer them some consolation that you know everybody feels scared. I felt scared doing it. I'm sure the people I write about in my books felt scared doing what they were doing. I don't feel that you're wrong for feeling scared. It just comes down to the thing we were talking about 10 minutes ago. Are you going to listen to your heart, or are you just going to do what makes sense and follow the crowd? Are you going to be brave enough to do that, even though you feel scared? So, my first steps, maybe I can use an example to better answer this question. I had that dream of writing a self-help book when I was 22 and I just left university. Now, it was a crazy dream because I'd never written a book before, um, written a dissertation at university. So that kind of thought made me think, well, maybe I could write a book. But I kept being told writing a book is one of the hardest things to ever make money off. It's impossible to get a publishing deal. It's just not going to happen. So I was very scared. And my thought was, rather than just diving straight into the book, I needed to build a platform for myself. And by building a platform for myself, I could then shoot at this ultimate dream of becoming a self-help author. Now, my platform happened to be two things I enjoyed doing. It was never going to be, a regular job which drained me and left me demotivated. My platform was tennis coaching and hypnotherapy. So that brought me in an income just enough to live off, but also, really importantly, an income which paid a reasonable hourly rate. Now, in the UK, you can get quite a decent amount of money per hour for those two jobs. So that meant I didn't need to work 40 or 50 hours a week doing them. I could pay all my bills and a little bit more with just 20, 25 hours of work a week, and then put 20 hours a week into my writing. So I'm trying to answer your question by saying that if you're too scared to just go for broke and just chase your dream, your crazy dream, straight out the gates, then look at doing something that similar to what I did, which is building a platform for yourself, which gives you enough time to still pursue your bigger vision while enabling you to cover the bills. Is that answering your
Oh,
question?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I also think too that that could lead right into, if you want to just to speak about this, expand on it as much as you'd like though, but the hypnotherapy, and you do touch on a very important subject in the book about mental health drugs. I don't want to give the whole book away because folks, we're not even scratching the surface on a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's a lot more in here. But the hypnotherapy, I have never tried that. I have never tried that. And I think it's an area that I'm really interested in seeing if it's something that I would even be willing to do. My mind kind of works a little different, so I don't know if I can get there just yet. But hypnotherapy and mental health drugs, maybe talk about that just a little bit because you made some great points in the book.
So this is from the Rebel Code,
Yes,
and my point is that I think there needs to be a deeper investigation of the mental health industry, and the fact that we so readily will just accept medication from doctors, and we say, right, we fix our discontent by taking some form of drug. And I challenge that. I don't say never do it, but I say ask some serious questions. If you are feeling that you're depressed or you're anxious, and I make the point that, as a rebel, it's quite a hard road and it's very easy to slip into depression sometimes as a rebel.
sure.
That's why I wrote this chapter for all those rebels who are finding it tough and perhaps are questioning their mental health. I'm just saying, be careful, do a lot of research before you ever let yourself touch any form of medication because the statistics aren't good. I think it's something close to 60% of people experience either side effects or withdrawal symptoms when it comes to getting off mental health medication. I also use the example, I start the chapter with the example of Jordan Peterson, the well-known author who it sounded like he had a horrific time because he got too addicted to benzodiazepines because he was trying to help his anxiety. Anyway, I offer a solution, and this solution I feel applies to most people. I'm not saying it applies to all people, but I feel there's a massive overprescription of mental health medication. And I say, why not try this instead? As a rebel, your three main drives are this: you need freedom, you need meaning, and you need connection. If you can base your lives around those three things and how you can acquire them, you're going to find that you're probably very happy, very mentally stable, and you're absolutely okay. And you don't have to face that potential risk
Mhm.
of what might happen to you if you do go on mental health medication. So then I offer some suggestions on how you can create a life of freedom, meaning, and connection. And I don't know if we got time to go
Oh, I've got
into
as much time as you need.
now.
Absolutely.
So basically, I say I also use the example. There's a research. There was a really fascinating TED talk which
Mhm.
said depression is a disease of civilization, and it was I don't know whether he was an anthropologist or some other kind of PhD doctor, but he investigated tribal societies and was amazed to find that none of them experienced depression. And this is despite them having living standards so far below ours, despite the fact that they don't live as long as us, despite the fact that they have much harder lives than we do, none of them got depressed. And he was like, well, how is this possible? But when you break it down, it actually makes sense. Tribal people, people living, in indigenous people living in tribes, jungles, or wherever it might be, they don't have a government over them. They're free in that sense. They have meaning. Okay, their meaning is survival. And we've moved beyond that now in our civilizations. We have to find a meaning beyond survival. But hey, what better meaning is there to life than survival when you really break it down? So they have freedom, they have meaning, and they have connection because they all live in villages. They all live in harmony, well, close to harmony with each other, around each other. They're
Mhm.
not isolated in their one-bedroom apartments, spending all of their time in a social media world or watching porn or watching Netflix, completely disconnected. They have people around them. So, okay, for you and me, we're not going to go and join a tribal society. So, how does that apply to us? How do we build freedom, meaning, and connection? Well, we've got to make an effort to try and connect with other people, family members, friends, reaching out to them. Meaning is we've got to find a project, whether that's work or something outside of work, that is deeply meaningful to us and to pursue that. And freedom, we've got to find a way of living our lives where we are the ones in control of our time. Okay, if you love working an employed role and that to you is the place you want to be, then that is freedom to you. But if you don't, then you've got to find a way of breaking free from the 9 to 5. And if you have those three qualities, those three what I call drives, freedom, meaning, and connection, I'm pretty much can say with a lot of belief that you won't need any kind of mental health medication, and you're going to be absolutely fine when it comes to mental health if you have those qualities. There may be some exceptions to that, but I think the general rule will be you're absolutely fine, and that's why I write that chapter, just as a warning about society now is pressuring us to be ever more aware of our mental health, which is good in some respect, but it's not good in the respect that the solution seems to be, well, just take this medication. And I'm challenging that. So that's why I wrote that chapter.
And I think it's fantastic that you do that because there's not enough people that come out and talk about those types of things and the alternatives, to regular medicines that just, like you said, I think even hypnotherapy could be involved in this. And for someone who is like me, never done it before and maybe a little skeptical about hypnotherapy, maybe is there any advice you can give a novice such as me that would love to try it, but just has no idea what to expect?
Um, You probably it's a complicated world, hypnosis and hypnotherapy. There's so many stereotypes and
Mhm.
so much misinformation about what it's about. It's simply in its essence, it's a way of um, interrupting your conscious thoughts, going to a deeper level, your subconscious level, and trying to program that with a way that in a way that benefits you and can help your life. So most people don't realize that if they just sit down, close their eyes, and command their subconscious mind to relax, not in a stressed or tensed way, but to say to themselves, relax, 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 their subconscious will start to obey, and you will find that your body starts to relax. And it's not just relaxation. That works for confidence. That works for performance. I'm a keen tennis player. I use it when I play tennis. I will just give myself one word commands or two-word commands. And if I can get in the right state, my body reacts and it does what I consciously direct my subconscious to do that, and it will react. So really easy way. You asked for a really easy method. I would follow exactly what I just said. Sit down, get comfortable. Don't be agitated by, you haven't just been on the phone or your mind's not whirring, or even if your mind is whirring, it's a good experiment to just sit down, tell yourself to relax over and over, 2, 3, 4 minutes, and see how you feel in 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes later. You'll be amazed to find that you have relaxed. If you do it in the right way, if you're not forcing yourself and if you're not tense, then you'll be amazed to find that you can actually give instructions, sorry, to your subconscious mind, and your body will react. So just start with that, and then you can adopt that in so many different areas of your life. um, Confidence, whether you were doing a presentation or something like that, and you were to just spend 5 minutes every night relaxing your mind, and then repeating the word confidence, or repeating a scenario in your mind where you're performing confidently and speaking confidently in other people, in front of other people. There are so many applications for hypnosis. It really is a hidden gem that not many people realize or understand.
And I think, we've talked about on a few episodes mindful meditation, which is basically what you're essentially referring to. There's obviously methods for the Tao Te Ching and a few other things that people can look at that can help them, down that road as well. And I think you talking about that coming from someone other than me, is fantastic. And I think the way you lay out the stuff in the books is great. And Joe, I got to tell you, I got to be mindful of your time talking about mindfulness. We have had a fantastic interview. You are spectacular. I am a big fan of your books. And folks, if you are interested in changing your life and doing it on your terms, these books are that kind of a scenario where you can get into it, realize that it is possible, which is the main thing, realizing it's possible and he gives you some great steps and advice along the way to make you feel confident to go out there and make those dreams come true. And I think they're spectacular books. And if you don't have them, please go out and get them. And I know you have a deal going, I think, for one more day, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, when does this go out, Tony? When does this interview
This
go
will be
out?
going out next Tuesday. I can get it out sooner if it needs to.
No, 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 no. We'll do if you do next Tuesday, the deal is ends on Friday. But what I'll do on Monday is I'll reduce the price of Escape the System and the Rebel Code. I'll put the Kindle version. I can't reduce the paperback version, but I can reduce the Kindle electronic version. I'll put them to just $1 for 2 days. So if you're listening to this Tuesday, I don't know what date that will be, but if you're listening to it the 23rd of July, Tuesday the 23rd of July or Wednesday the 24th of July, you can still pick up those books for $1. I'll have to raise the price after that, but if you listen to this and you want to get them immediately, then that offer will be on.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Is there a link that I need to put in the show notes for that?
I will send it to you.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Thank you so much. Joe, thank you. You are welcome to come back on this show anytime that you want to. If there's anything that you want to talk about, I would love to hear it. I love the way you come at things. I think it's absolutely great. And you're helping a lot of people, I'm sure, everywhere across the world. And I thank you so much for this. Great, great interview.
Thank you, Tony. I really enjoyed it.
Have a great day. What a great interview. And I thank Joe Barnes again for his time and a very thoughtful discussion that I hope you found the same incredible value in it that I did. Once again, visit his website, www.escapethesystemnow.com. And I also thank him for providing my listeners with a great deal on his books, the $1 Kindle deal. You cannot beat that. That is incredible. So please take advantage of that. And it will be good for 48 hours after this episode hits. The website and the book deal are in the show notes. So please check those out. So what do you think of this interview? I would love to find out. Here is where to get a hold of the show and let us know. These are in the show notes, but as always, here they are. You can message the show from various platforms. From each episode, it'll have a send us a text message link. Click that. You can message the show and let us know what you think there, or you can email us at newvisionoldways@gmail.com, and that's newvisionoldways@gmail.com. You can also find us on what was Twitter, now X. I know I don't really have to say that much anymore, but that is at New Vision Old Way. There is no S on that. At New Vision Old Way. You can look us up on Facebook. It's usually if you just type in New Vision space Old Ways podcast, you will find us. And as a reminder, these are growing platforms for us and expanding all the time. So we need your help to get the flow going with the community. And last but not least, if you could do me a huge favor, subscribe to us, like us, follow us, leave a review on whatever platform you found us on. That would be so appreciated. That will also help secure guests like Joe Barnes that we will be booking in the future. I am excited that season 2 is in high gear, and I am dedicated to making this next season even better than the first one. So I can't wait to get your input. I also can't wait until we get together for the next episode of New Vision Old Ways. Until then, be safe, be cool to each other, and let's change the world. This episode of New Vision Old Ways has been engineered and produced by TKM Productions and your host, Tony Marinaccio.